Vice President of the Doñana County Historical Society, also a Historic Preservation Commissioner and the Director of Public History at NMSU. I think many of you know loosely that I'm very interested in neighborhoods and neighborhood identities. I once gave a talk here about some of the work that I did on the Velma neighborhoods. And I say neighborhoods because there are tons of them in New Mexico, West Texas, and one in Southern Colorado. So I'm always really curious about what buildings and neighborhoods say about the community's identity and how the buildings sort of reflect sort of a historical narrative. And that's something that I find that buildings don't have agency because they don't have voices, but they can tell us a lot about what people think and how they use those buildings. And so I'm always very fascinated by that. In addition to that, I have a forthcoming book on the Trost and Trost Architecture Company based out of El Paso. Ideally, that's going to be submitted this August, but realistically, that's probably not going to happen. But it should happen in the next couple of years. I'm about halfway through that right now. So today we're here to talk about Rosedale Farms, and I'm going to show you exactly where Rosedale Farms are. It's a neighborhood in the Lower Valley in El Paso. But before I get into the actual talk, I want to preface this actual presentation on a couple of things. The work that really went into the talk that I'm giving tonight, I need to say two things about it. One is that I was a Mellon faculty fellow between El Paso Community College and the University of Texas at El Paso. Both of those institutions got a 3-year grant from the Mellon Foundation, and the idea was to have professors work with freshmen on giving them technical or hands-on experience, a tangible skill set, and they tried to pair each professor with somebody that wasn't from their discipline. So I worked with 2 freshmen from El Paso Community College, a math major and a biochemistry major, on a historic preservation project. So that in itself was a really interesting challenge, but I have to say that I have faith in the field of historic preservation because both of these students, both were freshmen and they didn't even like history, and they did an amazing job. And you're going to see a lot of their work tonight in this presentation. And in fact, a lot of the groundwork on this presentation is really their hard work. Second thing I want to say is that the year that I was a Mellon Fellow was from 2019 to 2020. So that should tell you that this project was cut short because of COVID. And in fact, almost everything that was this project probably would have been done, but on March the 13th, basically the world kind of closed for a while and we didn't open up for a while. And so this project it's the second thing that I want to say is that this project is largely unfinished. What you're really seeing is basically kind of like the first and second phase of a 3-phase project. And so I want to give myself a little bit of an out. A lot of the information that I'm sharing with you tonight, although I think is pretty solid, there is a little bit of wiggle room that I have not been able to collect and capture all of the historical narrative of this particular neighborhood. There is no records anywhere in any archive. I had to really piece this together through basically kind of detective work between the El Paso County Clerk's Office and various newspapers, and mostly walking out in the neighborhood and chatting with many people that either grew up there or they're still living there in the community. And so there is a chance that there is some wiggle room that either I missed something or the information is just sort of slightly off. And that's kind of, I think, common anytime you do a historic preservation project. So with that, I will go ahead and begin. And I think the best way to kind of start this presentation is to kind of first show you, where the neighborhood is located in El Paso. So I'm going to try my best to use the cursor on the screen here to kind of give you an idea where it's at. So up here at the very top, this is the Spaghetti Bowl in El Paso. So this would be basically like central El Paso today, and this would have been the far east side of El Paso when this neighborhood was first designed in 1922. Rosedale Farms, if you can kind of follow the cursor, is all the way over here at the very bottom. This is the original subdivision I'm going to talk about, and it kind of spreads up through here, and I'll show you a slightly better map of this in a second. Also, to give you some, just to give you a better sense of where it is, if you kind of look up here, This is where the Fountain Mall is. So if you've ever been to the Fountains, you can kind of see that. And then here's the Walmart Supercenter where the tragic shooting happened in August of 2019. So you can kind of see that it's basically about a mile and a half from that Walmart Supercenter. And then with this, let me show you the next one. This just gives you a better sense of like the actual, and then I wanted to show you here that it's not that far from the actual United States-Mexico international boundary. Here's the neighborhood that I'm going to be talking about tonight. There's actually three phases of the neighborhood. There's Rosedale Farm, there's Rosedale, and then just right across the street, there's going to be another little community that I talk about that is going to be an extension of this neighborhood that will be generically referred to as Rosedale Manor. And the last one here is, and I don't think this is actually picking up here, but, oh, it does. Okay. It doesn't pick up on the computer, but it does on the screen. You get a sense, this is just the top part of Rosedale, not even actually the whole entire neighborhood. But I wanted to give you a sense of like, just you can kind of see the outline of the houses and the buildings in the neighborhood. So you can get a sense of that. So when the neighborhood is first designed, it's technically from UTEP about 10 miles from UTEP. And it's still 10 miles from UTEP today, but that is still like when this was first designed in the 1920s. I mean, that downtown area, Rosedale Farms, is almost like its own community, its own city, its own, it's hard to say suburb because it's so far outside of El Paso. And I kind of want to stress that because what's fascinating about the story is that Rosedale Farm loves to use this idea as a community that it's this ideal place to live in the city, but it's always out there. And today it's like right smack in the city itself. It's been consumed by the city. So, and it's interesting because it still likes to think of itself as this neighborhood that is out there. And I think that will make sense when we kind of get a glimpse at looking at the neighborhood itself. So the very first thing that I had to do, the biggest challenge, and so I want to kind of just share about the project. When I became a faculty fellow, I was a faculty fellow for 1 year. And the biggest challenge for me was how was I going to mentor two freshman students, and at the time only one freshman student that majored in math that didn't even like history. How was I going to convince them that this was a worthy project? And so the first thing I had to do for 3 months was put together basically like a tutorial, like a TED talk on how to do historic preservation. And luckily the student I was working with really took to it, and she just ended up really liking it. And so as soon as I kind of got her off the ground and running in August of 2019, I actually needed, I proposed this project because I drove by the neighborhood, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I drove by this neighborhood, whoops. So I worked at El Paso Community College for 12 years. And if you've driven in El Paso in the last 15 years, it's like this ongoing construction project, ongoing forever, everywhere in the city. So I would actually take 54. I'd take the Anthony Gap and I'd go down 54, and then I'd get off at the Spaghetti Bowl. And then I'd come right around here and I'd get off on Troll Bridge. And then I'm just trying to find Troll. Yeah, here it is, Troll Bridge. And then this thing is a little finicky. Whoa, I'm not even touching anything yet. So basically I would drive down this street to get to El Paso Community College. And as I was driving down the street, I always drove by this neighborhood. And it was this really interesting, the neighborhood, the best way I could describe it, it looks a lot like Mesilla Park, or it looks like the old neighborhood that's near downtown by Old Town in Albuquerque. So it's this really sort of secluded neighborhood that has these really big old sort of like 1920, 1930 homes that sit on these massive this massive sort of acreage of land. And so I would drive by for like 5 or 6 years. I just kept driving by this neighborhood. And then sometimes I would drive in it thinking like, wow, like this is almost like a hidden neighborhood. So, as I kept driving by it, I kept trying to figure out a way to kind of do a project on it. So when the Mellon Foundation actually created this opportunity, I actually had no idea what I got myself into. I proposed it. I got a mentor. I got an assistant essentially. And then I was like, well, what did I get myself into? So the very first thing I had to do was figure out the actual, the subdivision. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy because if you've ever done any kind of historic preservation work in Las Cruces, you go to the county clerk's office and you look for a subdivision plat. Well, that's what I thought I was going to do when I went to the El Paso County Clerk's office, but they don't call them plats there. They call them maps, subdivision maps. And it took me really 2 weeks to figure that out. And nobody at the county clerk's office bothered to say, hey, we refer to these things as maps, not plats. So that was like spinning my wheels for a while. But this is the original Rosedale Farm subdivision plat. And I'm going to get into the history in just a second, but I want to just kind of show you what I was able to find to date on these subdivision plats. And so the idea with Rosedale Farm is that the original owner of Rosedale Farms, a guy by the name of Winchester Cooley, that is a cool name. Like, too bad he didn't have a kid that was Winchester Cooley Jr. It's almost like a law firm or something. So I really dig the name. He actually came up with the idea of turning most of his farm into 1 to 3 acre home plats. So basically creating these like what I would call ranches in the city. And so you can see here, this is the original, the very first original subdivision plat. It has 16 of these 1 to 3 acre sort of home lots. This is early 1922. At the end of 1922, you can see the triangle of the first one right here. And then he expands it even more. And then the next year, he has a full-blown subdivision plat, actually done in a very professional manner. And you can see, and this is actually an extension just slightly north of that plat that I just showed you. And so you can see that this is turning into much like a very modern subdivision that we would see today in almost any part of any city, especially in the borderlands. So, and then the plat is going to be, I can't find any plats during, as of right now, I can't find any of the ones during the Great Depression. Although they continue to do a lot of work. I just don't know if they're lost. I don't know if I'm looking for them incorrectly, but the after 1923, the newest one is going to be 1941. And so they keep adding on to the neighborhood all the way through 1955. And so I will get to that, and I will get into that history and kind of tell you what it sort of looks like. So when Winchester Cooley, he has a business partner, a guy by the name of Frank Purvis, and they basically are, they just kind of think it's one of those things, like if I can use a 1980s movie, it was a build it and they will come kind of thing. The thing they struggled with is they built it and not very many people came. And so they partnered with several real estate agencies that were working on the far east side of El Paso. And one of them was this guy right here, M.L. Caldwalder. I hope I said that name right. What's that? Cadwalder, okay. Sometimes in the El Paso Herald, they sometimes will list him as WL. And so that was a tricky thing too in the research, is that it seemed like to be these interchangeable things. And I never found out if it was two people, one person, or just this typo that kept kind of coming back and forth. So I don't think it really matters, because this is going to be the real estate agent. And what he basically does is he comes up with this sort of catchy phrase. He starts partnering with Cooley to start selling these sort of home lots, and he starts referring to it as the ideal spot to live is in the valley, is in Rosedale Farms. And they start using these really interesting ways of trying to lure people out to Rosedale Farms. They basically are saying, hey, you don't have to pay taxes out here. You can have horses, you can have chickens, you can grow your own food. You can basically live this whole entire rural, rustic kind of pastoral lifestyle out here in the far east part of El Paso. But the city is just right around the corner. It doesn't really tick up too much business, but the catchy sort of thing becomes part of the Rosedale sort of moniker up and through the 1970s. So it's a really sort of fascinating thing that takes place. This guy right here, Roy Carey, is going to be really instrumental in really completely changing Rosedale Farms. He is a World War I veteran who moves to El Paso from Ohio. And he starts off just kind of working around as a lumberyard owner and distributor. But he realizes that he's got an interesting niche in El Paso. As we'll see in just a moment, El Paso goes from something like 800 people in 1880 to about over 100,000 by 1920. So in 40 years, the entire community grows, and there's a huge need for houses, especially after World War I. So Carey kind of recognizes that there's this opportunity, and he starts developing his own homes in the late 20s. And what we're going to see is that Cooley and Purvis are going to reach out to him along with the real estate developer. And what we're going to see is that Carey is going to be instrumental in building over 300 of these sort of Carey construction homes in Rosedale Farms. And so essentially, Cooley establishes the neighborhood, and Carey is going to be the architectural identity and leave those sort of lived experience in the community. We were actually able to, I created a database, and in my database right now, I have 259 of these homes completely documented, cataloged, and inventoried. I got all the information on them, when they were built, all the owners that own them. So they're ready actually to be part of a historic district whenever we can maybe sort of make that kind of happen. What we see is that when Carey comes aboard, he realizes that he thinks that one of the biggest problems with the reason why people aren't interested in going out to Rosedale Farms is that it's because it says farms. So he encourages Cooley and everybody else that's involved in the project to drop the Rosedale Farms and just start to refer to it as Rosedale. And immediately there's a huge tick up in the fact that people are going to start buying these homes. Now we're going to see that after World War II, Carey is going to partner with an actual architect, and they're going to bring in a whole new era of the Rosedale Farms, and that's going to be the mid-century modern. And we'll take a look at that in just a moment. So the first thing I want to sort of talk about is actually the home templates. And so there's a couple of things that are going on here. And I want to just pause this and just say a couple of things. Usually when we study urban history and we think of the modern subdivision, or actually sort of the modern kind of mass-produced house, history sort of has taught us that that all happens in Levittown, in sort of New York, New Jersey area with Abraham Levitt and sort of those Levitt towns. And I would say that that's not necessarily incorrect, but I would say that the story is actually a little bit more nuanced. In my dissertation, I actually have a whole chapter dedicated to looking at Cliff May, and I'll show you some Cliff May stuff in just a second. Cliff May starts to do the same thing that the Levitts are doing after the war in New Jersey and New York. He's actually already doing that in 1932 in San Diego, and during the war in Los Angeles. And so I make an argument that when we actually think of those mass-produced homes, that becomes sort of the lived experience by most Americans after the war. It's actually an American West experience that's happening. It's not necessarily this East Coast experience. And so, and I thought that I had that lock and step. I thought my argument was solid. I thought I had all the evidence. And then I stumbled into this project, and actually Cooley and Carey are doing this in the 20s. And so I'm not ready to like make another argument about this again, but maybe El Paso factors into this sort of World War II lived experience by what we see that's going on in Rosedale Farms. So what we're going to see is so what Carey is going to introduce in his sort of very customized, what he calls Carey constructed homes, he's going to introduce 3 home templates with 4 architectural facades. Most of these facades are going to look really familiar to us. And I'd like to say something about these facades just before we start looking at them in just a second. I kind of feel like, based upon the research that I've done so far, is that Carey kind of knew his clientele or the customer base. Either these were people that were living in El Paso already that wanted a traditional style borderlands kind of a house. So he introduces the Pueblo Spanish Revival, or sometimes referred to Spanish Pueblo Revival, depending on the source. He also knows there's a lot of people moving to El Paso, especially from the East Coast. They would feel more comfortable in more of a colonial revival style home coming from the East, maybe in the South or the American North. And then there were also transplants coming from California that were already familiar with the Cliff May home and the California hacienda style or the rancheria that was being marketed in California. So basically, he creates these sort of three architectural styles that are very popular in the 1920s and 1930s, readily available to kind of sell to any one of those clients. And you really start to see it. And what we will also see in these homes that's fascinating is that he often takes liberties in sort of smooshing some of those architectural styles together. And so sometimes it's hard to always differentiate just some of the styles themselves. Um, this is one of these, I don't know how well you can see it, but this is something from the El Paso Herald. This is the advertisement that you can see for Carey Constructed Homes, constructed with care, and you can see that he's targeting Rosedale in this, and so this actually starts to lure people out. He built a number of homes in the sort of old San Francisco and Manhattan, now historic districts that are near central El Paso. So he already had a little bit of credibility with El Paso clientele. So by him going out to Rosedale, that actually is going to both help Cooley and also going to help the Carey brand. So here's the things I want to sort of mention. I guess I have my numbers off just a little bit. 1800, we have El Paso 800 in 1881 goes to 80,000. I must have been thinking about Albuquerque when I said that 100,000, but that's a massive amount of growth in a 40-year period. So here's the chronology that I'll share with you right now. In 1922, he develops it for 30 homes. By 1940, only sort of 36 of these homes have been built. But because Carey comes on board in the 30s and starts to get a lot of groundwork, remember we're in the Great Depression in the early 1930s, but by 1940 we can see that Carey is going to build more than 300 homes in Rosedale. So that is very impressive on its own. Here's the history of the Rosedale Farms. It goes from Rosedale Farms to Rosedale, then to Rosedale Manors. And then in 1973, it goes back to adopting the Rosedale Farms name. And that's because, again, they want to start marketing themselves as this sort of ranch or farm experience in El Paso. A couple of other things that I found out as I interviewed people in the neighborhood is that the biggest complaint, and I think this is the biggest complaint in any historic district I've ever worked in, grocery stores. I bet all the people in Alameda would love a grocery store, and all the people in Mesquite would love a community grocery store. It's just, yeah, when I lived in downtown Albuquerque, I lived by, I didn't live that far from the Sunshine Theater, and there's no grocery store down there either. So grocery stores. And so that was the biggest complaint about living out in Rosedale, is that you had to drive all the way back into town, to get groceries, only to take them all the way back out to Rosedale. So one of the biggest things that becomes a selling point after the war is they finally get a grocery store. And man, let me tell you, the newspapers brag about that grocery store a lot. The other cool thing is that during the war, the real estate agents go over and grab soldiers from Fort Bliss and bring them out and say, hey, we just want to, thank you for your service. And they really use it as a way of trying to sell potential future clients on buying a home out in Rosedale. And it actually works. A lot of GIs return and then end up purchasing a home out in Rosedale. So some interesting things. And then what's the coolest thing I found was that there was a teenage community newspaper out in Rosedale. It was called just like the Rosedale newspaper. And basically these teenagers went around and just reported on basically like the chisme, the gossip of the community. And there's a really cool newspaper. I never got a copy of it, but I read several times in the Herald and the Times about them reporting about the newspaper itself and interviewing the teenagers that were involved in it. And then interviewing the parents and some other people that weren't too thrilled about the way the teenagers were reporting the news in the community. So that's another sort of fascinating thing that I would like to explore a little bit more, but it's a kind of a trickier thing to sort of track down. So this is Clifford May. Clifford May, again, he gets a start in San Diego, but by the middle of World War II, he's building actually out in the Pacific Palisades. And then by the end of the war, he comes up with He's building these massive, large custom homes, and I would encourage all of you to go home and sort of Google Cliff May. He has some gorgeous sort of architecture plans on the internet. I actually spent his papers are at the University of California at Santa Barbara. So when I was in grad school, I went out to Santa Barbara a lot. It was a great excuse to go to Santa Barbara. If you've ever been there, it's beautiful. And his archival papers are something like 600 or like 366 linear feet. So you literally have to make appointment months in advance, and then they all of those papers are off site. And so they put you in this big architecture room, and you're literally on ladders and stuff, kind of looking at his architectural plans. And so it's really nice. One of the things that Cliff May recognized is that he was building these custom homes, but because of returning GIs after the war, he wanted to build what he called the little house, or the little version of that. And so he comes up with something called the Cliff May Magic Money House. And he doesn't build these houses at first. He simply creates the architectural plans and sells them. And he sells something like 18,000 plans in about a 3-year period. And this is this is one example of a Cliff May Magic Money House. This is another version of these Cliff May Magic Money Houses. And so in between 1947 and 1945, these Cliff May Magic Money Houses sold between $3,900 and about $8,000. They're anywhere from 900 to about 1,200 square feet. And as of last week, when I checked on these homes, these are all in Long Beach right now, the ones I'm showing you, about $1.8 million. So massive return on your investment on that one. So he builds these homes with the idea of making them like a California rancheria. This is actually the idea was the original California ranch house. This becomes the post-World War II California ranch house. He really loves this idea of the seamless transition from indoor to outdoor. You can see it just in these windows. I think I got another one. No, I don't. So he loves these sort of seamless indoor to outdoor kind of transitions. The original houses all came with a pulley system that had this big awning, and so that you could like basically do all of your things outside. When he builds his own customized house, he actually puts the entire kitchen outside, everything outside. So when you would cook, you cooked outside. This house, you can't see it, but what's this sort of off screen is every house came with a fire pit too, so that you could literally have this sort of leisure outdoor experience. This is actually his first rancheria style homes. These are in California starting. He starts in 1932. His peak in California is in 1937. So this becomes really the model that we see in the post-World War II sort of experience, especially when we think of the California ranch house. So I thought what we would do for the rest of this is just kind of look at the Carey construction in Rosedale Farms. And so he builds these colonial style houses in Rosedale Farm. And what's really fascinating is he uses a lot of rock as the building material. You can't see it in this home, but if you look on the side here, you can, I guess it's not translating as well as I hope, but that's all constructed out of rock, and it's this colonial style home. Again, this shows up a little bit better. It looks like on the screen, you can see the nice rock sort of texture. This has actually been painted over, but it's rock as well. And what's really fascinating about these homes is if you walk the neighborhood, and Chris, you're going to drive by this, like you actually will drive by this home the next time you go to work. What's really fascinating is the thing I encourage everybody to do, that if you're really interested in historic preservation and you're really interested in, you should walk the community that you're researching and working in as many times as you can. So I walk this neighborhood. I probably have, more than 120 miles of walking this neighborhood. And what was really fascinating is you start to see a building pattern in the way that that Carey started to build these homes. I don't remember the street name off the top of my head, but if you were standing in front of this house, basically the house that would be behind it and then one over would be an identical replica of this house. And then across the street, kind of one over or maybe one up, an identical replication of this house. So the way that I sort of started to envision this is what they did is they just dropped off all of the material right in the road, and then they just started building those houses. And then when they were done, they went on to the next architectural style, and they started to fill the neighborhood. And so they're custom homes for sure, but they're building them kind of in batches, and they're making slight tweaks to each one of the customized homes. So just to give you an example, this is on the south side of the street that's before it. So basically the street over, one up is the same style house. So you can kind of see that it's slightly tweaked, but it's pretty close to an ideal replica of it. So he's building mass-produced homes in this sort of customized way. So I'm going to get through the colonial rock houses. As you can see, they become more elaborate, and this is in the old part of the neighborhood. They become, I call these the affordable versions. And then as you can kind of see, these are on bigger lots of land, and they become maybe less affordable. The other style that's very popular in the Rosedale Farm neighborhood is going to be the Pueblo Spanish Revival. One that I think this architectural style is something that all New Mexicans can really identify with. We generically refer to this as the Santa Fe style. Just drive around Santa Fe, you see this style everywhere. We don't actually see this style too often in Las Cruces, although there are a number of great representations in our community. One of the biggest is going to be the old courthouse that sits adjacent to the downtown corridor. And so these homes are gorgeous in the Rosedale Farms community. Again, if you drive this community, you'll see that I get the sense that, there's across the street, there's one that's kind of a couple houses up. Behind this, there's another version of this house, and this family has painted it green. But this is kind of like what we would see mostly on University now. They're kind of I would say this is a smaller house. I like this one a lot. I walked by this a lot, and I chatted with these people a lot too. Everybody in the community grew to know me. I feel like I did a really classy move. I always dressed in a tie when I was out there trying to get some street cred. I don't know if that gave me street cred, but they thought of me as being a little bit more legitimate. That did not work in Bellama. I got ran off thinking that I was codes. So you got to play that game a little bit, it's a little bit of a tricky game. One of the things I'd like to point out about the Rosedale Farms is you can literally date the homes almost by looking at the garages. As you'll notice, some do not have garages because they have detached garages. Other have carports and garages. Sometimes the garage is two-door, sometimes it's single. And so I wanted to kind of point that out. This family has turned the garage into another livable space over here. I think we can see that. I wanted to go back here. You can see the single car garage. So this is in an older part of the neighborhood here. And I thought we already passed an example of one of the detached cars, but maybe not. And I'm sure we'll come across one of the detached garages in just a second. I just can't remember because I literally looked at like 200 photographs this week of Rosedale Farms in order to kind of put this together. So I can't remember what stuck. So these are all the Spanish Pueblo revival. This family was actually in the process of rehabilitating this. And so they put a lot of time and money into it. I literally saw this over a 6-month period of this house go from being it was looking pretty rough and it was starting to look really sharp by the time that we finished this project. So, and this is actually right across from El Paso Community College. So this is actually one of the detached garages. So this is the front of the house. Oh, wait, that's not the right one. We looked at it, but I'm not going to go back, but this is actually in the back of the house. And so you can literally see how the car kind of starts to play an important role in Rosedale Farms based upon its proximity to the house itself. And the other style that we're going to see is going to be the California ranch home. This is going to be more of a mid-century modern version of the California ranch home. And it's like what you would see if you drove into many neighborhoods in Las Cruces today. The one that kind of stands out the most is the one right up behind Las Cruces High School, sort of the Crescent Moon neighborhood. There's a lot of these style kind of California ranch homes. So very popular style in the 1950s, although he's building these in the 40s as well in Rosedale Farms. And again, let me point out, this is a California ranch, but it incorporates the rock. So who knows what went into that decision? Maybe they had an abundance of rock or they're working on another project and they decided to include it in that. None of those records are around. It's just more of me speculating in this. I like this house because they threw in that sort of colonial Spanish style, column on the end there, the tower. And so it looks it's really cool. It actually is more impressive when you see it in person. And this is another one of the detached. This is the one I thought I included. So you can see the garage is totally detached. And they have rehabilitated it. It too was in pretty rough shape when I was doing this. And what's interesting is they chose to make the garage look more like Spanish colonial style as opposed to the rest of the house. It's kind of like two architectural styles built into this part of the bill of fabric. And this one obviously has been modern. It's been completely rehabilitated. And then on the edge of Rosedale Farms, there are a number of these sort of cottages or bungalows. And so I got the sense that Carrie felt the need to include some maybe more affordable homes in the community. I don't get the sense that they were necessarily well received because there's a cluster of them and they're only in one small part of the entire neighborhood. So not sure exactly because the company records don't exist and I haven't been able to find anything in the newspapers. It's sort of just kind of again a educated guess on looking at Carrie's project. But this is the cluster of them near. And then the other style that we see, and this will be the last one, is looking at the Spanish colonial revival. This obviously this is a very popular style in California. And Henry Churros actually borrowed a lot of the Spanish colonial revival when he was doing his Spanish Renaissance revival. And so this architectural style, I think, will look very familiar to many of us living in the borderlands. So use of those sort of red clay tiles. It invokes a lot of like kind of the low, kind of hipped roofs. You can also see the garage on this one as well. By 1947, we see that, I don't think I included a map in this, but if I could just go back just really quick and show you from the map. Let me see how efficiently I can do this. So starting in 1947, they are nowhere near kind of tapping out both Rosedale Farms and Rosedale at this point. But they also realized that one of the biggest challenges of selling these homes is that most of them are on septic tanks. And a lot of people are complaining about that. So they would like the city access to the city sewage. And so they go across the street and they build in this area over here. They start what we would consider to be like the smaller mid-century moderns. The closest example that we would have to that in Las Cruces is more like Belima, although these are way nicer than the Belima homes. But they are on very small lots and they're much smaller houses, but they are the extension or the modern or the updated, more affordable version of what's going on across the street over in Rosedale Farms. And so the mid-century modern, this is one part of the project that I would say that I need to go back and do a little bit more research on because I don't think we completely figured out where the the construction ends when we think of I went to the wrong side here, with the actual mid-century modern part of the project. So let me just show you what these look like. They're all very close together. He continues to use a lot of the architectural styles that are across the street, but as you can see, these are streamlined. They're a little more pedestrian. They have less of those architectural sort of sharp sort of features or accents. They become a little bit more muted. And then you can kind of see the mid-centuries, like butterfly, an attempt to like a kind of a butterfly roof in here. I really like this home, but you can see how close the homes are to one another whereas the other ones are sometimes, quite a bit of a walk to actually get to the next home and over in Rosedale. So a couple of things that, as I bring this sort of to conclusion and kind of open it up for questions, a couple of things that I want to so we were working on this for a nomination to the National Register of Historic Places. And actually, as we were basically concluded with at the end of phase one, we were definitely in phase two. So the challenge is that we actually didn't start inventorying this neighborhood until about the end of January of 2020. And we actually had plans to go out and finish the entire inventory over spring break, but unfortunately COVID happened. And so most of the pictures that you saw today were from the grad student or the freshman students that did this. A lot of this was done by a car to stay safe, and everybody's masked up, and we didn't know what we were getting into, but we were really trying to finish this project because we only had till May to actually finish and submit the report to the Mellon Foundation. But I would make an argument that this neighborhood is very worthy of nomination to the National Register. It's super unique. It's a very self-confined community that really tries to incorporate El Paso's both urban and rural sort of sensibilities into the community. It is actually really trying to create a rural space in the middle of an urban economic center. Today, if you go out there, they're very proud of that. And if you drive by any of these lots, they're massive. Some of them have ranch corrals or have horse corrals on them. Almost all of them have chickens. They're very proud of that. And Chris would love this. A lot of them have pecans too, although maybe that's in one section, but pecans are big over in that community. What I would also say is that what's really cool about the neighborhood is that the families have stayed there. It's gone from grandma to mom and dad now to grandchildren. And that's also a very important part of this legacy is that you don't see a lot. They're very proud of how insular and isolated that it is. It's almost kind of like you buy into this idea, this lived experience. And what was really surprising to me about the entire project is everybody wanted to talk to us about it. They wanted to share these stories. They wanted to kind of tell us about what it was like to live there and what it meant. There was at times, Rosedale Farm was very conservative in its political leaning, and other times it was very liberal in its political leanings, and a lot of the people wanted to kind of talk about that and the inspiration. Like with any historic neighborhood, there was, in addition to complaints about the grocery store, there was also complaints about churches. There was no really close churches, but if you go down North Loop today, there's tons of churches. So they were able to kind of address a lot of these concerns. But I would also say, just as a parting sort of thing about what we think about Rosedale Farms and this particular history, is that what's fascinating about it is this idea of creating a lived experience in which there is very similar architectural styles that really kind of predate the mid-century modern sort of craze in the United States. And if I ever return to this project, which I hope I do, I kind of want to start to explore that a little bit more because it might give us a window into what people in the borderlands were thinking about subdivisions and the built environment before World War II. So thank you, and I'll take any questions that you have about Rosedale Farms.
Where are the schools?
Yeah, so let me go back to the map. So I want to show you how close, so you're going to think I'm lazy in a second. Yeah, so the schools are really close by. There's a number of schools. There's Riverside High School. There's a number of elementary schools that are very close to this. So let me just see how I can go back over here. I'm PC illiterate. If this was a Mac, I'd be a whiz, but. So let me show you, as soon as it goes back to the slideshow, let me show you on this map. So this is El Paso Community College right here. You can even see the Via Verde campus door. Oh man, let me go back here. And so, you know, basically this is where Chris works now. This is where I worked. If you literally, you know, it's a 5-minute walk into the northern part of the neighborhood. So the community college is literally across the street, and I drove down this street right here every day and drove in the back way, passing both Rosedale and Rosedale Farms. But if we look at if you were just to pull up this map and kind of pan out, you would see that there's tons and tons of schools, and eventually those schools become they're a World War II, post-World War II kind of expansion in that way. You go down just a little bit more on North Loop, you have Yarborough, and then you have those high schools that are off of Yarborough. And I always space what school is off of Yarborough, but I think it's Bel Air. I could be wrong. Fun fact about El Paso, if you ever ask for directions in El Paso, they always give you the direction by the nearest high school. If you're in Las Cruces, sometimes it's by the nearest Walmart. Interesting thing how we use those kind of markers. But in El Paso, everybody's really big on high schools, and I feel like I should know them better than I do. So, but there's tons of schools in the neighborhood. Yeah. Other questions, other concerns, yeah.
I read, or maybe the teaser or an advert that you had, that this had been farmland, like it was an orchard, and that was part of it, that they broke it up. But were there heritage trees that were still involved in the neighborhoods or preserved in there? And then secondly, like, did they have a feature for surface watering where they actually kept developed ditches between the houses?
Yeah, so there's these arroyos that are back here in the back along the border, and I don't know if they picks up in any of these, but they're definitely in the subway. Maybe we can go over here to the plats. They're actually identified in a couple of the plats, and I don't know if you can see back here like the Mesa drain, but I'm just they're not coming up very well, but there is also like there are a number of mentions of water resources, mostly for farming for these large trees. One thing that Cooley is going to do in the 40s is he's going to put in a community swimming pool that is also going to be a thing to kind of be a selling point. But let me say a little bit something about the farmland that is also a tricky thing too. Nobody really knows how that Cooley acquired this land. But it is actually part of a Spanish/Mexican land grant called the Hague Tract. And Cooley and Rosedale Farm was sued at one point because the Isleta Pueblo actually claimed that it was part of their stolen land from the actual Pueblo community. I have no idea what ever happened to that. I don't know if it was settled. I don't even know if it's ongoing. But some of the land with Rosedale has also been disputed because of both Spanish land grant and the Isleta Pueblo. And I don't know exactly what parcel of that is included, or if it's actually any part of the subdivision. It's very vague with that description. So yeah, I need to figure out more about water, but if you drive through there, and I would encourage you, if you're anywhere close to the fountains, just to run over there. It's only a mile down. Massive old growth trees that are probably just in themselves priceless, and a big selling point. It's almost like the old growth trees that you would see in Messiah Park. It's very similar to that. So I hope that kind of answers, but I don't have all of the information on that one, but it's, you know, bits and pieces of picking that up. Yeah.
As a follow-up, because one of the most interesting dynamics is where these modern home buyers are paseantes on the Sequia.
Yeah.
Have to learn to water with their neighbors.
Yeah, that's also a big challenge too, because it is literally getting the water like you would with EBID. It's the same thing. You're almost getting the water rights to that. And they do mention having your own access to your own water rights and being able and them actually creating tutorials of how to flood your property, you know, for both you know, grass and for trees as well, and your gardens. Yeah, that's mentioned in a couple of the advertisement as well. So I'm getting a sense that some people bought it and were like, I don't know what I'm doing, you know, because I'm not really a rancher or a farmer. You know, please help, you know, kind of thing. Yeah, those are great comments and questions. Thanks. Yeah.
This was pretty contemporaneous with the development of Cielo Vista.
A little bit, yeah.
Were they compared? Were they in rivalry in any sense?
I don't think that this subdivision was in rivalry with anybody until the very end after World War II, when it goes into the mid-century modern homes. Because actually Bellum is building way over there by Parkland High School, which is kind of by where El Paso Community College is at the Trans Mountain campus. For all of us, that's kind of where the old Dudley baseball fields were, over by Fort Bliss. And so that's the only time I would get a sense that there was any kind of competition. But in the original Rosedale Farms and then the Rosedale, when they're these commercial, or I'm sorry, custom sort of carry sort of fabricated homes, I don't get the sense that there's any competition for that, because one, you mostly have to be affluent, you have to have the money to do it. And two, you're literally giving up some of your autonomy, because you're choosing to live far away from anything, almost like with Picacho Hills today, or what's going on behind a mountain. You kind of give up a little bit in order to get that kind of freedom. And we both know that, at least I'm assuming, most working class Las Crucens can't afford those homes. I'm just speaking from my own experience. I will not be moving to Picacho Hills or behind a mountain anytime soon. So that's kind of, I think, would be the similar experience what we see in the original Rosedale and Rosedale Farms. Great question. Thank you. Yeah.
He tried to sell 1 to 3 acres. What is about the average size of a lot that a house is on now? They seem to be, at least, they have very large front lawns. Are they about an acre or a half acre now?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and thank you for it. So let me see if I can kind of maybe point this out. Like, just look at the side yard of this house. The front is over there where the car is. Look at the side yard, and I'm standing like about 10 feet into the yard, about to probably get yelled at, you know, because I'm trying to get as close as I can to get you the rock, but I'm literally in their yard. So the interesting thing about this is that construction is going on today, and some of these families are choosing to give up the lots this size because they don't feel like they need it, or they don't want the upkeep. And so, like many historic districts, this one is actually continuing to add new houses, and the houses are really cool, but they are literally now being sandwiched in to look more like a modern neighborhood, where you get maybe 5 or 10 feet on each side. And so, to answer your question, which is really a good one, and it's hard to answer, is that you still see a lot of the 3 acre lots. You see the 1 acre lots. You see half acre lots, and because it's the neighborhood is continuing to evolve, continuing to, you know, grow. It's not frozen in time in any ways. It's slowly changing. I would say in the older part, you get a lot of like lots that look like this. But you can see here, this is slightly in the newer part. You can see that the neighbor is not so far, but the actual lot sometimes in the back and the front of these houses are still really big. But you can see on the other side. when we were doing this project, they put in a really awesome, very modern El Paso, like international style building. And I remember asking the neighbors about it and they were livid, super livid about it. Like, in fact, it dominated the conversation when I wanted to ask them all these other things about how they live there. All they wanted to talk about was the house coming in next door, which I don't blame them. It was, I wouldn't say it was, I thought it was an awesome looking house, but it didn't fit the built fabric of the rest of the neighborhood. So it's evolving, it's organically growing, it's organically sort of condensing. But the way I would answer that question is that the community of Rosedale and Rosedale Farms would prefer it to stay as close as it was when they grew up there. So they're trying to protect that as much as they can. It is not a historic district, so they really welcome this project. They would really like it to be nominated, at least the majority of the residents I talked to. I'm sure there's some that would not like that, but I didn't hear very much opposition to it. So they feel the need for it. They don't have a neighborhood association, but they're really well organized in the fact that they all know each other, even though it's a big neighborhood, and they have open dialogue about things. So once they found out we were in there, by the time we started showing up at the next house, it was kind of like everybody knew who we were. And so some people brought us in and gave us cookies and gave us Cokes and water. It was great, you know. I never had that experience. Never had that experience in Las Cruces, I'll tell you that. So it's interesting in that, in protecting that identity. Yeah.
A number of neighborhoods will have restrictions such as you cannot build close to the street, you have to be 60 feet behind the street line or 15 feet from your side
Mhm.
acreage. Were there any restrictions on how you would build in that neighborhood?
I never looked at the covenants. That's probably something I need to do. That it would be in the covenants. My assumption would be is because of the growth of the neighborhood. I don't know if each one of these neighborhood plats have a slightly different covenants. I would argue that the new mid-century modern has a different kind of covenants because they are actually directly reliant on El Paso for its utilities and like especially water, whereas the other side of the neighborhood does not need that. So I would bet that the covenants are slightly different in each part of that. So I would need to look at that, and I would bet that the covenants are probably in some way have some kind of racial restrictions too. I would bet on that.
Well, sometimes covenants only last for maybe
Yeah.
50 years.
Yeah. The best way to answer that is I don't know, but I strongly assume, probably like you do, is there is some kind of regulations that are guiding that. And my assumption, just working in the neighborhood, is that in the older part, there's probably different covenants than there are in the other parts of the neighborhood, because some of these lots have it's a massive sort of walk up to the home itself. It's so far back, whereas like, and you can just kind of see that. You can kind of see that in some of these pictures, you know, like that house for sure, but then this house is a little bit closer. That one's set back, and so that's my best guess at that right now. I definitely need to look at the covenants and kind of pull that back, but I did this all in 9 months with one person, so I feel like I covered a lot of ground, but it's really probably a 3-year project with like 10 or 12 people. But we managed to at least get a lot of stuff done on it. Other questions, concerns? Well, thank you for giving me the time to share the story with you. It's ongoing, and so thank you. One last thing to say, if you're interested in this story, I actually I published a blog. I didn't publish a blog, but the El Paso, the EPCC UTEP Humanities Collaborative actually had me write up basically the kind of presentation I gave you. And if you just type in Rosedale Farms, El Paso, you can see my short blog. It's about 1,000 words that covers a lot of this stuff. So again, thank you. Have a good night. Thanksgiving break too.